Welcome to the 30s. Disasters this decade include the farming and weather disaster of prolonged drought, causing the air to be thick with the soil drying out into fine gray dust and blowing right across the continent. This was called the Dust Bowl. Also, there was an infestation of grasshoppers eating anything which could somehow still be grown. Never had so many people in wealthy countries like ours been homeless, jobless, and starving. People were sleeping in ditches. People were getting put in jail so they'd get food. People were hopping onto freight trains to get transportation to the next town, hoping there'd be work of some kind. Banks kicked people out of their homes and off their farms if they missed interest payments due to unemployment or drought. People who had happily bought cars could now not afford to keep them running nor fueled, so automobiles being towed around daily by horses became a common sight. They named these after Canadian Prime Minister R.B. Bennett and called them Bennett buggies. In 1937, the dream of having hydrogen-filled blimps providing us with cheap, easy, safe air transportation dies with the Hindenberg, a German dirigible which catches fire and crashes.
On a silver platter. Where's
and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the passengers screaming around it. I don't do it. The burst into flames. Wait, get out of the way. Get this, Charlie. It's fire and it's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's burning and bursting into flames and it's falling on the mooring mast and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is the worst.
In 1930, William Lyon Mackenzie King is still Prime Minister of Canada, but is knocked from this position in 1931 by R.B. Bennett. Bennett is then so unpopular, due to not being able to magically fix the Great Depression all by himself, that Mackenzie King then beats him again in 1935, holding office until 1948. In 1933, by a narrow margin, Germany elects a new chancellor to run the country. His name is Adolf Hitler. He is an Austrian. He'd not been raised with much money. He'd wanted to be a great painter, but had failed to get accepted to the art school he'd wanted to get into. He'd fought as a low-ranking soldier in the First World War, delivering messages in the trenches. He had been absolutely heartbroken at Germany surrendering, and had been convinced that Germany could have won if only they'd kept fighting the First World War. He blames rich people and liberal politicians for selling out Germany, for stabbing them in the back during the Great War, is how he puts it. He is furious at Germany being crippled by the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles. The Great Depression is hitting Germany harder than most countries. Germany has to pay damages for the First World War to the other countries, and can't afford it. Hitler speaks passionately in public about winning back what he feels is rightfully Germany's, of recapturing past glories, and not being pushed around by the other countries in Europe. He writes a best-selling book called My Struggle. He blames rich people for selling out his country, especially rich Jews. He vows to fix the problems Germany is suffering during this Great Depression. Once in office, he stockpiles a huge military force in direct contravention of the Treaty of Versailles. A giant navy with submarines and huge metal destroyers with aircraft carriers. A giant air force called the Luftwaffe. A giant army. No one in Europe knows what to do about all this. Britain, under Neville Chamberlain, is polite to Hitler and hopes he'll be nice in return. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, at first makes secret deals with Germany, hoping to get in on this real estate country-stealing action. Hitler also revamps the highways and roads all over Germany. Now they are nice and broad and modern, especially the ones leading out of Germany, ones he can drive tanks on. Then he starts invading surrounding countries, starting with Poland in 1939, also Belgium and France. He conquers these countries with almost no trouble at all. Ignoring previous agreements with the Soviet Union, Hitler clearly wants to conquer it as well. Germany teams up with Japan and Italy, who also are ambitious about redrawing all the lines on maps. White people trying to take over white people's land causes a global outcry and military reprisal, A second world war is on. 1930s Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom include Ramsay MacDonald, Stanley Baldwin, and Neville Chamberlain, who all had to try to deal with the Great Depression. Neville Chamberlain was Prime Minister when Hitler invaded Poland on his way to taking over the rest of Europe. The practice before Hitler shows what he is really up to has been to placate Hitler, to try to let him away with whatever he wants and not let a huge war start.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
In America, in 1933, poor little rich boy Franklin Delano Roosevelt, not to be confused with his rich cousin, earlier President Theodore Roosevelt, becomes President of the United States of America. He is confined to a wheelchair as he is paralyzed from the waist down. He stands up to make speeches. He has to try to fix the Great Depression. He proposes new, radically socialist programs to help out the desperately impoverished farmers and other poor people, calling it the New Deal. It is intended to rebuild the American economy and infrastructure. It's intended to restructure how laws affect farms, schools, banks, industry, railroads, and money in general. This bold plan gains Democrats huge wins in Congress, but when it doesn't seem to be working as advertised as quickly as advertised, the Republican backlash involves working to dismantle most of these relief and welfare and aid programs, claiming they are costing too much and doing too little. This fight over how much the American government should collect for taxes and how much they should attempt to help out poor people is still what we tend to see dividing American politics today. Roosevelt has to deal with America entering the war once Pearl Harbor is attacked in December 1941. Until this point, America had not been wanting to get involved in Hitler's shenanigans over in Europe. In 1930, King George V is still the ruling monarch of the United Kingdom, which includes us, also England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, New Zealand, Australia, and random other bits and pieces of planet Earth. In 1936, King George V dies, and his elder son Edward steps up to briefly be King Edward VIII for a few months. King Edward then is told by the British government that he cannot now, as king, simply go ahead and marry his mistress, a divorced American actress named Wallis Simpson. So Edward quits being king before the year is out.
You all know the reasons which have impelled me to renounce the throne. But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love.
Quitting being king or queen is called abdicating the throne. After a lot of kerfuffle, Edward's younger brother Albert takes over and calls himself George VI, King of the Commonwealth. Canada gets her first female senator in 1930. Her name is Carine Wilson. In 1936, Barbara Hanley becomes the first female mayor. She is mayor of Webwood, Ontario. In 1933, Prohibition in America finally ends, so Americans once again gain the right to drink alcohol without being arrested.
It's my privilege to deliver to you, with a compliment to Anheuser-Busch, the first case of Budweiser beer to be delivered in the state of New York. Happy days are here again.
The war this decade is the Second World War, which has Germany, Italy, and Japan take on Europe and British colonies like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It starts at the end of the 30s in 1939 and lasts into the 40s.
The responsibility lies on the shoulders of one man. By his latest act of naked aggression, Hitler has committed a crime not only against Poland, but against the whole human race. From a swoop over Polish land, Polish cities and harbors are attacked. Even the capital of Warsaw itself is bombed. But Britain is ready. To quote the Prime Minister, the time for words is over. The time for action has come. The King visits the Prime Minister in Downing Street. As Mrs. Chamberlain and the Prime Minister drive to the Commons, the House assembles for a fateful last debate before Britain declares war not on the German people, but on the leaders of the Nazi regime.
Just like with the First World War, America stays out of it at first. America will have no part in the Second World War until the 40s. Canada will express a wish to be seen as distinct from Britain by declaring war separately, and a couple of weeks after, the UK sign. In the First World War, when Britain had declared war, that had just automatically meant we were at war. Not so now. Books that were written in the 1930s include J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, the book that would lead to his somewhat World War I-inspired series of Lord of the Rings books. Also, John Steinbeck's Depression-era Of Mice and Men. Superheroes were new things this decade, with the creation of both Superman and Batman starting the craze off. At the movies, horror movies are a craze starting in 1931 with black and white talking movies such as Frankenstein starring Boris Karloff, The Mummy also starring Boris Karloff, Dracula starring Bela Lugosi, and the groundbreaking King Kong with Canadian Fay Wray as King Kong's lady friend. In 1930, the Empire State Building in New York City opens just in time to feature in the movie King Kong. Just as the commercial success of silent films paid for the development of sound by the end of the 20s, by the end of the 30s, color hits the silver screen. In 1937, Walter Disney put out the first feature-length color cartoon, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In 1939, the MGM movie The Wizard of Oz brings live-action color to cinemas everywhere. Cleverly, it is shot in fake black and white until the point at which Dorothy Gale has left Kansas, only to explore an Oz that is full of the first live-action color footage most moviegoers will have ever seen. New war technology includes flying rocket bombs you can launch from another country, armored metal fighter and bomber aircraft with pilots communicating with each other, and ground bases by radios equipped with oxygen masks to handle higher altitudes. Oh, and parachutes. Canada gets into the radio and movie craze by creating the CBC, or Canadian Broadcast Corporation, in 1936, and the Film Board of Canada in 1939. In 1936, Trans-Canada Airlines, today known as Air Canada, was formed. In 1938, Hahn and Strassman discover nuclear fission, which enables America to build the first atomic bomb, which they will use in 1945 to cripple Japan. The invention of the atomic bomb is largely the work of German Jewish scientists who fled Germany due to Hitler, ironically enough. In 1934, Ottawa lost its long-standing NHL franchise, the Ottawa Senators. We would not have the Ottawa Senators again until the 1990s. In 1936, just 3 years before the Second World War started, the Olympic Games are held in Berlin, Germany's capital city, with Chancellor Adolf Hitler watching over it. Despite Hitler's teaching about the superiority of the German people over all other people in every way, African-American athlete Jesse Owens dominates, beating Germans in everything he competes in.